everyone, it's me, Anea. It's been a while since we've chatted, since April. Um, Today we're going to be talking about my second pregnancy that has, however, ended in a second miscarriage. But we're going to be doing this in a two-part video. This part is going to just be about the pregnancy, and the second part will probably be in a week from now, as I'm still miscarrying currently. And we will talk about the miscarriage in the second video. So this first video is just gonna be good vibes. I want to remember baby Lennon, just how they were at this point. I am very happy and privileged that I got to carry them. A big reason why I wanted to do these videos is because I still want people to know about baby Lennon. But on top of that, I think it's important for us to be talking about miscarriage. I don't feel like it's talked about enough, and I also found it interesting how different this miscarriage was from the last miscarriage, and also the differences in my pregnancy. Both pregnancies ended in a missed miscarriage with around roughly the same timeline. However, there were still differences in this pregnancy from what I experienced in the last one. But anyhow, let's just get right into it after I take a sip. So we're gonna start at the 2-week wait, which for me is really just a 1-week wait, because I'm actively testing ovulation and pregnancy, so I always find out quite early. And we're gonna go through week by week with little summaries that I have here in my notes. So if I'm looking down, that's why, all the way up until week 10. So for my 2-week wait, I knew I was pregnant this time because I had the exact same symptoms that I did in my last pregnancy. And before I get into it, as always, I'm about to get TMI. If you're not up to hearing about vaginal discharge or pooping or gas or anything like that, this probably isn't the video for you. But, so in my last pregnancy, I noticed that I had a lot of discharge in this 1-2 week wait. And to be completely blunt with you, I'm usually as dry as the Sahara, at least at this point in my cycle. So whenever I notice that I'm not, that is, little alarm bells going off. And after I had my first miscarriage, I went right back to that, where I was dry as the Sahara and didn't have this excess of vaginal discharge. So during this most recent pregnancy, during this 1-2 week wait, that was the first thing I noticed. I went from dry to just constantly having to go to the bathroom and clean myself up. So that's when I had a pretty good idea that things were rolling. I was also noticing some mild cramping, which can just be ovulation cramping. Ovulation cramps can start a few days before ovulation, obviously go through ovulation, and continue to go on for a few days after. But I was noticing that I was cramping even beyond a few days after my ovulation. And I know when I ovulate, by the way, because I take ovulation strips and they peak when you have a surge in the hormone LH. I can't tell you what that actually stands for. I think it's like luteinizing or something like that hormone. But when that peaks, you know that in the next 24 to 48 hours, you're going to ovulate. So I usually go peak, ovulation day, and then 1 DPO. So when it comes to getting my positive, um, I always start testing at 8 DPO. It's historically the earliest that you can really know if you're pregnant. And so I did that test and I swore I saw the teeniest little shadow. Tristan was like, no, it's not there. You're crazy. But I felt like it was there. But I didn't take that as a positive yet. The following day at 9 DPO, there was the faintest line. And at that point, I knew. But Tristan still wasn't sold. We've had some bad experiences with pregnancy tests and indent lines in the past. So he's always a bit more hesitant to get excited about it. But that was the day that I cried because I knew. And then at 10 DPO, there was an obvious line. And so whenever we get an obvious line or what we think is one, we will, and by we, I mean me, obviously, we'll take a clear blue digital test because, again, Tristan really likes to see the inwards pregnant. There's no room for error. And so I saw that line, I did the test, and I got my pregnancy test result as well that said yes. So we knew technically at 10 DPO, but I feel like I knew at like 8, 9 DPO. With my last pregnancy, I found out at like 9, 10 DPO. I think I had that shadow at 9 and then had that more clear positive on the 10 DPO. But that's about everything for the 2-week wait, which again for me is more like a 1-week wait. As you can see, I got my positive at around 8, 9 DPO, which is just barely past 1 week. So I was able to start tracking my pregnancy as early as week 3. So that's where we're gonna go next. Week 3, I was still noticing some cramping, which is completely normal. That is just implantation cramping. Your uterus stretching and doing its thing. I did, however, have 1 day of spotting, and I think that was at 12 DPO, so about midway through the week. And I feel like that could have been implantation bleeding. A lot of people say, well, you have implantation bleeding before you have a positive test. But I got my positive test really early, and it's very normal for people not to get a positive test until like 12, 14 days past ovulation. So I definitely think that could have been implantation bleeding, which I did not have in my last pregnancy. During this week, I was also experiencing gas, which, as I would say in my last pregnancy videos, I have IBS symptoms, so not always a symptom of pregnancy, but it was something that I felt like I dealt with more often throughout this entire pregnancy. And in the 3rd week, I had a few days where I was extremely dizzy, like just I couldn't look around the room without feeling like I was like on a ride. I didn't want to go out of the house. I had made plans with a friend and I had to cancel them because I just didn't feel confident driving to town with how dizzy I was. I just was not feeling good. So that was week 3. Week 4, I was still having some cramps. And when I say cramps, I don't mean like all day long cramps. I'm talking like once or twice a day for like maybe 10, 20 seconds, having some mild cramps and then it being gone. Which again is very normal, especially in early pregnancy. I started noticing that I was having a bit of nausea in this pregnancy. Again, like, it was worse than the last pregnancy, which is almost none. But it definitely wasn't like full blown nausea, trying not to vomit, what have you. It was just like this constant, uncomfortable feeling in my stomach all day, which made it hard for me to get stuff done because I just felt like gross, but like I wasn't like gagging or anything. It did decrease my appetite a lot of the time, so I was kind of living off of croissants and baby crackers until like supper time, and then I'd make myself eat a good meal, which never sat right in my stomach. It was just kind of like that all the time. During this week, I noticed that I was having a lot of loose stool, which again is normal for me in general with the IBS symptoms, but it definitely was seeming more prominent during the pregnancy. And I was also starting to feel tired, fatigued. Um, for week 5, I was having some mild headaches. They would just kind of come and go. And this is the week that I started noticing that my breasts, my chest area, was becoming really sore. It would be like I'd lay in a position for a while and feel fine, but then I'd roll over, and that change in position would like just kill and was very painful. Touching them was very painful, but as long as I was just like standing or sitting or whatever and not touching them, which isn't that hard not to do, they were okay. I also had one day with a little bit of spotting in this week. I didn't notice that my cramps and my spotting were lining up with each other. So that meant that I wasn't very worried about the spotting because a little bit of spotting here and there in the first trimester is again relatively normal. And I wasn't like spotting all day long when I was having these moments. It was like I went to the bathroom once during the day, noticed a bit of spotting, and then the next time I went to the bathroom, and for the rest of the day I was fine. Um, so again, it was normal. It didn't have any red flags for me. And the last thing for this week is I was still feeling that same nausea that I was the week before. Week 6, I again was still having that same nausea. It never got worse and it never got better. It was just always the same. I also had, again, sore breasts, which I didn't have, I should add, in my last pregnancy. That was one of my like red flags that was making me worried that something was wrong, is because everything that I had heard up to now was that I should be in pain, I should be noticing changes in my chest, and I wasn't. And so that was a big red flag for me. Um, so this made me feel more confident. This and the little bit of nausea that I was experiencing in this pregnancy that I hadn't in the last, I was feeling more confident that this was going to be a viable pregnancy. I was still noticing the cramps here and there, which again is still normal. And I again had one day where I noticed a little bit of spotting. My cramps and my spotting weren't aligning. And it was the same as last time, where it was just one moment in one day where I had noticed some spotting and then I didn't for the rest of the day. So again, no red flags. It felt pretty normal. I will say though, in my last pregnancy, I didn't have any spotting until the time that I started miscarrying. So that has been a big difference between these two pregnancies as well. Um, but yeah, that's it for week 6. Week 7. This is when I started dealing with constipation. Throughout the first 6 weeks, I was really dealing with loose stool and that being an issue. But week 7, I would have one day of constipation, the next day loose stool, and it was back and forth and back and forth. Um, I was still having the sore chest, and I had another day of spotting, the same as the one day for the last couple weeks. So again, I wasn't worried about it. However, this week brought a different challenge. So I started having this really bad pain that was in my chest, like in my actual, not my breasts, in my chest. And it would radiate down to like the top part of my stomach, and it would go up into my throat, and it was giving me this wicked, terrible headache. And so for the first few days, I kind of just was resting. Um, and then it wasn't going away. So I tried to make an appointment with my nurse practitioner, but she wasn't going to be available for like a week. And even then, they were like, I don't know if we'll be able to get you in. If you call next week, we might be able to get you in to see a different nurse practitioner. If it gets worse, go to the ER. So I just kept resting. I was trying to figure out what it was. I was taking Tums like candy. I assumed that it was heartburn. And I still think it was a little bit of that, but I also have a condition where I can't burp. Um, I burp maybe by accident, like once or twice a year, and I don't know how it happens. I can't replicate it. Um, and something that I had noticed when watching a lot of people's pregnancy vlogs on YouTube is that a lot of them are having excessive burping. And so what I think was happening was that I had a lot of trapped gas in my chest that was radiating down and up into my throat, and all of this pain was giving me a headache. It almost got to the point where I was going to get Tristan to try and burp me like a baby, like on the back, because I've had people pat me on the back and have that feeling that I'm about to burp and be like, "Stop, this is weird." So I was desperate. I was in a lot of pain. But then over the weekend, that week, it let up and it finally went away, and so I didn't have to go to the nurse, and I didn't have that pain again for the rest of the pregnancy. But it was definitely really weird and something that I hadn't experienced in the first pregnancy. So then in week 8, I was still dealing with the constipation. I was still dealing with the sore breasts. I was still dealing with the same amount of nausea. And I noticed in this week that I was also bloating a lot, which is probably due to the constipation. And that's all to say about week 8. Actually, one other thing that I think happened week 8 was I think that was my first prenatal appointment. And that went pretty regular, but they did prescribe me like a nausea medication that I could take. So I started taking that in week 9. And um, in week 9, when I started taking those meds, I noticed that the nausea was gone. I didn't experience nausea for the rest of the pregnancy, which was great. I was actually starting to feel like myself again. I still had the sore breasts, still had the occasional cramping, still had the constipation. And this is the week that this was like the last week of December. Um, and around the holidays, Tristan and I always go to Nova Scotia to see my family and his family from the 29th to the 31st. And we have a lot of people to see. It's about 10 different stops that we have to make in the span of those 3 days. and it completely wiped me. I was exhausted. By the end of each of our visits, I was like in a daze and just not focusing anymore. And anytime we were in the car, I was asleep. um, so I did notice quite a lot of fatigue that week. That was the week that we told our family we were pregnant. Um, and yeah, everybody was really excited. And it was a great visit. But yeah, that was week 9. Week 10, kind of the same as it had been. I was having the occasional cramps. I was still having the sore breasts. I was having the occasional headache. But this is the week that we had our ultrasound. We had our ultrasound that Friday. And actually, the day before was the day that I got my first round of blood work. Um, so, so I was kind of anxious to be excited about the ultrasound. However, we were trying to stay positive. Tristan was very excited. Uh, when you go in for an ultrasound, you have to have a full bladder. So I'm a bit of a late riser. So I just didn't use the bathroom at all that morning, um, and continued to drink water. I was bursting at the seams, but we got to our appointment early in the afternoon, and we they started off with the external ultrasound just on the stomach, and he did that for a little while, and he wasn't really saying anything, and so then he got me to go empty my bladder, and I came back in and we did the transvaginal um, ultrasound, and I'm familiar with these procedures, and I knew for how far along I was, we shouldn't have had to do a transvaginal ultrasound. The regular ultrasound should have been fine. Um, so I was already getting a little bit nervous when we had to do the transvaginal one. But he did that, and he still wasn't really saying anything. And he was asking me if I was confident in my cycle and like how far along I was, and I'm really like precise with my cycle. Like I said, I track my ovulation and all of that stuff, so I was really confident about how far along I was. And so that was making me nervous, and he kind of wraps it up, and he says that he has to go and consult with the doctor, and that he'd be back. And so, one thing they do, and I don't know if they do it on purpose to, because they're not allowed to say anything, but the both times that I've gotten an ultrasound, it's been with the same guy at the same hospital, and whenever he leaves the screen up on the results of the ultrasound, and I don't know if he just thinks that I can't read it, but like I looked at the screen and I was able to tell that I was only reading at 6 weeks. So I'm explaining this to Tristan because after, like, when he leaves the room, he sends Tristan in. Um, and I tell Tristan, like, I'm pretty sure I'm miscarrying. This ultrasound, it's saying that I'm only at 6 weeks, and that's not possible. Um, the ultrasound tech comes back in, and he says that the results are going to be sent to my nurse practitioner, that I'll have to make an appointment to hear from her. But if he's going to be honest, that it doesn't look good. And then he let us have some time in the room together to process that before we left. Um, And so at that point, like, I knew that I wasn't 6 weeks. I knew when I got my test results, so we were pretty confident that I was miscarrying. Um, but yeah, and so we go home and we just kind of have a sad day. And I think that's where I'm gonna end this video. Um, and we'll get into the miscarriage in the next one. As I've said, I'm still in the process of miscarrying right now. I think the worst of it is over, but I'm still bleeding quite heavily and all that stuff. And I don't want to make this video and then a few days later have something significant happen and then have to like add it to the video or redo the video. So I'm just gonna wait to do that. But yeah, we've named the baby Lennon. Again, we never found out if it was a boy or a girl. And Lennon is obviously a more masculine name, but it's also become a very popular name for girls and just unisex names in general. And it's one that I quite like that we weren't planning on using for a living baby. Um, so, Lennon it is. Um, Thank you for watching my video. Feel free to comment, or if you know me personally, message me with any comments or questions that you have. I really am an open book. I don't want this to be a topic that people have to tiptoe around. Um, so yeah, um, thank you, and I hope you have a great day, night, wherever you are.